Hello, and welcome to Tax and Tech, a Deloitte podcast focused on helping you navigate the ever-changing tax technology landscape through insightful conversations with Deloitte technology leaders. I'm your host, Emily VanVleet, a partner in our tax management consulting practice here at Deloitte. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest episode here of Tax and Tech, which is our Deloitte Tax podcast focused on all of your tax technology needs and issues. Technology is advancing so rapidly today that it can be a bit hard for tax leaders to keep up. And so we have created this podcast to really set up some conversations with some of our Deloitte tax technology leaders to help our listeners navigate that shifting tax technology landscape as you chart your tax department's digital future. So I am very pleased today to have two of our leaders in the advanced automation space joining me for this episode. We have Craig Darrah. Craig is a managing director based in our Chicago office and has been practicing in this space around robotic process automation and now data wrangling and other types of custom automation for quite some time. And then we also have RJ Littleton, who is a partner on our team out of Dallas and has been doing the same thing. Welcome, RJ and Craig, to our episode.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Emily.
Awesome. So as we dive in, I am going to ask one of you just to kind of give us a quick explanation or description of data wrangling. It still is a fairly new term, I think, in the tax professionals' vocabulary. So just in case we need to help any of our listeners level set, RJ, why don't you just give me a very quick explanation of what is this technology that we're talking about?
Yeah, so I think for me, the easiest way to think of data wrangling technology is really extracting, transforming, and loading of data. So these tools allow us to work with very large data sets or small data sets, structured and unstructured data, but gives us a platform to be able to apply different rules or logic to that data so we can then take it and load it down into a tax system, for example, or an analytic tool or a work paper or some other downstream tax technology solution.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks very much. And so we have also just recently done a debrief webcast on this topic, and we're going to incorporate some of the questions that we receive from our audience on the webcast into our conversation today. So RJ, you just kind of alluded to how these data wrangling tools can be used with other platforms, but one of the questions that we are trying to answer for many of our clients is, how do you really apply a data wrangling tool along with the more traditional tax systems? So could you go a little bit deeper into that for us? Maybe give us an example of how these tools are used along with more traditional technologies?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question because we get that oftentimes in the market as well. Like, our data wrangling tool is going to be the one solution that's going to solve all my problems. And the answer is no. I think of these tools as gap filler solutions. The data wrangling platforms are going to be a somewhat similar type of tool in terms of at least helping us fill the gap or automate faster where we have inefficiencies in other systems. So take, for example, your provision or your compliance traditional tax software solutions. There's still a fair amount of work that happens on the front end of even getting data loaded into those tools. So think about pulling trial balance detail out of an ERP or having to merge together data from different sources and standardize it before it ever goes into those platforms. Data wrangling tools will help to put a process around that so you could automate that front end piece and then feed it into those solutions. Now, on the flip side, you can take that same scenario and say on the back end, I want to do more analytics and reporting, or maybe even drive more of a first level type of review. So think of the provision cycle. Typically in a provision solution, when you start to do a review process, there's going to be a number of reports, whether you're looking at the current provision calc or the deferred analysis or your rate rec. There's just a number of areas where you're going to bounce back and forth to do your analysis. We've seen a lot of clients have taken the approach of just take all that data out of those tools, and through the use of data wrangling solutions are able to feed that data into analytics tools and really drive more of a first level of review from that perspective.
Okay.
So, Emily, I'll add to that. The data wrangling tool sets are a blank enough canvas and have enough power to them that a lot of folks can be tempted to try to build pretty complex calc models in the data wrangling tool. And we have to sort of caution them on how far they go with that. So yes, it is a blank canvas. You do have all of that ability to do a lot of those calculations. But if you try to go too far with it, you're going to end up having a tool that you're having to maintain just from a logic standpoint that's pretty complex when there are changes in tax law and things like that. So we like to advise folks to, use the tax calc engines for what they're really good at. So the engines that do actual tax return calculations and things like that should continue to do those by and large, and use the data wrangling tools for what they are really good at, which is making all that data ready for use in those software systems.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you raised that, Craig, because I do definitely see that as a risk, but based on what I see some of our clients considering, I think that it can sometimes be a challenge to make sure that you are considering the core functionality and the other technologies that you already license and not, building other automations unnecessarily. In fact, when we did our webcast, someone was asking about a fixed asset process and applying bonus depreciation, and that probably is an example of a calculation where there are products already in existence that have that logic built in, and the logic is maintained by the other vendor. So that certainly is something that we'd encourage people to carefully consider where you draw the line around automation in these tools. So let me ask then, Craig, let me ask you another question just around ease of use. That is another question that we get very frequently. How easy are these tools for tax professionals to pick up and run with? How much IT support will we need or should we expect to need? Could you share your thoughts around that with us?
Well, keep in mind on the data wrangling side, we are talking about a wide range of actual software applications. It's not just one vendor or two vendors. There are multiple vendors out there that produce this kind of software. And the learning curves on each of them, it varies. Some have a fairly low learning curve to them, and it doesn't take a whole lot for an analyst to be able to pick that up and start to be able to use it and get some really good things done with it. But others are more, I'd say, programming centric, and it's just, you kind of have a different skill set to really get as far as you want to get with them. So it does vary a little bit. But in general, I think as a class, the business community is very pleased with what they're seeing and what they're learning about and encountering with these tools. It's helping them to do some things that they can do a lot more effectively with this tool set than they have with tools that they have had in the past. So when we had data wrangling, it's been around for a long, long time. The term is relatively new, but the activity of data wrangling has been around for a long time. What's really nice is that the more recent tools that have come into the marketplace have just made it a lot more of an accessible activity for the non-programming community.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would add to that is, when we think about tax departments transforming and there's a lot of conversation about workforce of the future, we are seeing coming out of school that the expectation is that these tools are in place within organizations. And as Craig mentioned, there's a number of different technologies and platforms out there, but they're learning this coming out of school. And even to the extent that we onboard interns and new hires, part of that onboarding process is to get them acclimated with these solutions and actually have them start building out automations in these tool sets. So if there's a desire to learn the application, I think the learning curve can be relatively short.
Okay, and what you're suggesting, RJ, is that some of our younger hires or newer hires might actually be coming in with some of these skills already?
Absolutely. There's a number of colleges and universities out there now that are implementing these technology programs within the tax function. And so they're learning data wrangling tools. They're learning RPA. They're learning machine learning and some of the bigger advanced technologies that are out there. And so as they come into our organization, they're going to gravitate towards these tools.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I think that conversation around ease of use kind of starts to drive pretty naturally into thinking about how you might deploy the tools in your department. And so I have seen companies take a couple of different approaches. At one extreme, you might have a very small number of licenses that you put in the hands of a few targeted people and make them responsible for starting to drive deployment through the department. On the other extreme, you give everybody in the department a license and just see what they can do once they have access to the tool. So RJ, why don't we start with you? What have you seen as being the more successful ways to approach deployment?
Yeah, so there's definitely a couple of ways to view it. I think one is, all in, everybody gets a license to a tool and they go start building their own automations. I think there's a lot of value in that, but there's also a lot of risk in that because you tend to have what I would call wild, wild west deployment, where you could have 5 or 10 people building out automations and they may be doing something very similar to what their neighbor's doing. And all of a sudden you've got a lot of workflows or, automations sitting out there that are very similar in nature and can become confusing. The other spectrum is you have a more targeted focus group, so super user group, where you've got 2 or 3 people in the department that are really the ones that are driving the build out of some of these workflows and automations and then sharing it with a broader practice. I think for me, they're both fine. I would caution on the wild, wild west deployment for sure, because you want to have some governance and structure around it. But I think more importantly, as you start to do these type of automations, think about how you can grab the data at the lowest level that would be needed to support multiple functions within the organization. Because with these tools, you can slice and dice and roll the data up, and you can also handle large amounts of data quicker. And so you can accommodate that sharing of data across the tax function easier.
I think the governance is a real key message that we are constantly coaching our clients around, and best practices on how to build effective workflows that are stable and robust and are going to carry over from year to year without having to recode them each year. So I think that's a real important message. And what I like to coach the leaders is, have your folks think about what's going to be best for the department, and not so much how the individual person is going to save time on their particular job, but how can the group come together and figure out what are the ways to deploy the data wrangling tool set so that the department as a whole is benefiting from that. And a lot of times it is going to be a super user model because sort of the nature, it is a different learning curve, and getting to the point where a person is really effective at doing sophisticated things with the tool set, they'll have to have a pretty good interest in it and spend some time with it.
Yeah, that's right. There certainly are leading practices, I guess you could say, around how you can actually build the automations in these tools. And so some element of training or expertise or coaching up front can definitely be beneficial over the longer term. But the other aspect of governance is around what RJ alluded to, which is you don't want people building a lot of kind of duplicative automations that, as you just said, Craig, are just making that one person's job easier. So do either of you have an example around how you've seen a company really do a good job with kind of keeping a pulse on which automations are being built within the department?
I think that what I've noticed has worked well is some of the platforms have an ability to publish the workflows and automations to a server for deployment. And that serves as a centralization function when they approach it that way. And that allows an administrator or a leader in the department to be able to keep a pulse on what has been built and what is being deployed and used by folks. So that's probably the easiest way. And communication, I think, is really the key thing, is just make sure that everybody is talking to each other about what the plans are and what they'd like to do, and keeping everybody on the same page.
So I'm definitely seeing that become a little bit more prevalent now in the market. Tax has a couple of super users that is really involved in helping build out automations from a tax perspective, but then they also have deployed these type of solutions more broadly across the rest of the organization, even outside of tax. And so to Craig's point, some of these tools can be deployed on a server, and what that's allowed them to do is to really govern which of the workflow automations actually get pushed to call it like a production state, but then you can put more control around access in terms of security, who can get to the data. You have more ability to schedule the automations and share it with the rest of the functions versus if you have two super users with desktop laptops that are in charge of running those automations for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. That's great. And in terms of these tools being used more broadly outside of the tax department, I would say that most of the clients I've been working with are situations where tax is looking to license a tool, but looking to license a tool that is not used elsewhere in the department. So would you say that that's an anomaly in what I'm seeing, or how frequently are you seeing these tools being used cross-functionally?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely still an anomaly, but it is coming up more because you hear a lot about it in the market. And so everybody else is hearing about it in the market, even outside of tax. And from an IT perspective, if you get back to the core of what these tools are, they're ETL tools, extract, transform, and load. And they've been around for many years, and they've helped IT functions load big data sets into financial systems and apply rules and logic and move data. And so as they become more user-friendly, you're starting to see more of the IT world become interested in these tools as well, for the simple fact that their people can learn them easier and manage them easier as well. So I do think that as we move forward and these tools continue to evolve, that will become a little bit more the norm than not.
Emily, I will point out, though, that this is a fairly low IT requirement usually with these tools. You don't need to have dedicated server environments and different things like that. These come often just in desktop type licenses as one option for deployment. So it's often just as simple as you pay for the license and you install the software on your computers. Then in other deployments, we've been talking about a server kind of a deployment that obviously that would involve IT, but getting going with this tool suite typically is not that difficult for companies or departments to do. So I think that does lend itself to standalone groups like tax departments saying, hey, I'd like to try this, even though I don't understand anybody else in the company is.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, so why don't we talk for a minute about another common question, which is how long does it take to build these tools out? So, RJ, why don't we start with you? What do you typically see in terms of time to value for a company that is starting to head down this path of automation?
Yeah, I think from a time to value perspective, these type of automations and solutions are going to be drastically quicker than your typical, tax compliance or consolidation tool or any other big platform that you're implementing. What we typically see is that we'd like to start fast. And so to Craig's point, getting access to the tools and being able to use them is relatively easy. It's not like you have to go through a lot of, hurdles and challenges to get these tools deployed. What we typically work with our clients on are helping them to identify some use cases that are good for automation, that will create efficiencies, that will get them excited about getting these tools deployed within the group. And we'll usually look at things from either like a pilot program perspective or a proof of concept. And if we were to do a proof of concept, we can execute on that in 2 to 3 weeks. We can have a proof of concept stood up and have a client working within those tools. Then if you wanted to take that and really think about automating a process, I think on average, 4 to 6 weeks and you can automate a process. Now, you may have multiple processes that you're wanting to automate, so that could draw the duration out, but that's a good rule of thumb to think through as you start to evaluate these tools.
I really like the scalability of the learning curve and benefit that can be derived from the tool sets. What I mean by that is that I can learn some basics and I can get some basic value out of the tools. I don't have to get all the way up to certification level before I can do anything. I can learn a little bit and I can do a little bit. And then as I advance more and more, then what I'm able to do will advance along with my learnings.
Yeah. So some great points. Okay, so to that point of kind of advancing, I know that within our Deloitte team, we actually believe that there's an opportunity for companies to be more strategic about how they use data wrangling technologies and really where they fit within the overall tax technology architecture.
It's another tool in your toolkit and another solution that is going to help you as you're building to an end-to-end technology platform from a tax perspective. We talked about it earlier that we would never encourage you to go and rebuild out a bunch of logic in a data wrangling tool that can be accomplished somewhere else. What I do think is really great about these tools is that they do help you automate faster, but also document requirements. So that way, when a source system opens up, you can push back that logic into a source system. So if you think of it more cyclical in nature, the use of data wrangling tools may be high up front as you're starting to automate, but then you get opportunities to go fix at the source. You may get some of that pushed into a source system. And so your use of the data wrangling tools will go back down. But where we see them if you think of an overall end to end and start from all your source data, in the middle, you're consolidating a bunch of data. And then on the far, end of the spectrum, you're reporting on it. Coming out of those source systems, there's still a fair amount of challenge from a tax perspective to get data at the level we need it, validated and formatted and to be able to be consumed into other applications. And so there's a large need coming out of those source systems for data wrangling tools. Once you get the data somewhere, there's still going to be a need coming out of wherever you put that data to format it and get it pushed somewhere else. So take, for example, I'm taking a bunch of data out of a source system and I'm supporting a calculation from a book tax difference perspective. Now that data needs to move into a compliance or a provision tool. So you can leverage these type of technologies to help facilitate the movement of that and the formatting of that data. And then the other piece that I would say is really driving the analytics, because the analytics tools are great once you get the data in a format that makes sense and you can actually do some drill down and analysis on it. But largely what's happened is that if you're not using a tool like a data wrangling tool, a lot of the staging of that data is happening very manually. And these will allow us to put more repetitive processes and structure in place on that.
Yeah, that's great. And RJ, those comments are actually a very nice lead into the next episode that will be coming along after this one, because I do believe that a lot of the potential of this tool set is in how it can enable us to think about our data differently within a tax department and then start to use that data differently. And so we are going to be diving into that part of the conversation more deeply on another episode that's going to be all around the data-driven tax department or the data-forward tax department. So be on the lookout for that episode. Craig and RJ, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and talking about what is probably the hottest technology topic in the tax marketplace today. So thanks very much for sharing your insights. Thank you to everyone listening in. Thank you for joining us. And I would encourage you to subscribe to our Tax and Tech podcast, wherever you do your subscribing of podcasts, so that you don't miss any of our episodes. We do have much more coming out around data in particular, and also around different types of finance and ERP systems. So until next time, a big thank you to everyone listening. I do hope you'll join us again as we continue to chart the tax department's digital future on another episode of Tax and Tech. Thank you very much. And finally, I would encourage you to subscribe to our Tax and Tech podcast series wherever you are listening in today so that you don't miss any of our episodes. We have episodes coming up around cloud ERP systems, tax technology updates related to U.S. tax reform, and many other timely topics connected to tax technology. So a big thank you to everyone listening in. I hope you will join us again as we continue to chart the tax department's digital future on another episode of Tax and Tech. Thanks very much.